Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar. My name's Calvin and I will be your host and presenter for today. And as you can see, I'm joined by Duncan.
Hi everyone.
Who will be co-hosting alongside me as well. The subject of which is payroll year end and part one, which is all about installing your update and of course preparing for that year end process. Now Duncan's going to disappear now, but don't worry, he will be back a little bit later on. But first, I'm just going to take you through a little bit of housekeeping. So you can see on the right hand side, you have a number of icons. Now we use GoToWebinar's webcast feature, which is why you'll be watching in a web browser at the moment. Now the icons go as follows. So just to explain what they do. So the top one is a microphone. Now that's in red and it's crossed out. Now you can't do anything with this. It's muted automatically. It just means if you have a microphone as part of your headphones or headset, or it's built into a laptop, for example, it just means that if you're having any conversations with either colleagues or if you're in the office or with friends and family, if you're working from home, like Duncan and myself are today, then you can feel free to have those without any fear that anything will be heard by anyone in the session. So it just means you don't have to sit there in silence. You can have any conversations you wish. The next one down is the questions icon. Now we do have a team of experts in the background ready to answer your questions. So if you have any, click on that question mark icon within the speech bubble. That will expand the page and you are then free to type your question into the white box and hit the blue send button. Your question then appears in a speech bubble in the gray area on the right, and the answer then appears underneath that question in the same bubble once it has been answered. Now, a quick caveat on that as well at the moment, there is quite a busy session, so there may be a slight delay in getting your answer to you, but we will work tirelessly and as fast as we possibly can to ensure all answers are answered in a timely manner for you. So apologies if there is a slight delay, but we will be working through all the questions to try and get them all answered. As we use GoToWebinar's webcast feature, there is not an ability to download the Q&A at the end of the session. So our advice is when we come to that point, highlight all the Q&A and you can then copy and paste that into a Word document to save for later. And we do use the reply to all feature, so you will see other questions and answers coming through. So I'll remind you of that when we get to the end, but just as a quick note, you can't download it at the end of the session, so just copy and paste that into a Word document. Now, speaking of keeping things for later, we do have a handout of today's session available. All you have to do to access this is click on the next icon down, which is that little piece of paper icon. When you click on that, you'll be able to download 2 copies of the presentation today. We have a nice digital copy which has the clickable links and of course all the nice colors. We also have a more printer-friendly version, which is in black and white, so it uses less of the printer ink. So you can download those if you wish to do so. And lastly, the icon at the bottom there allows you to make the presentation full screen by clicking on those 4 arrows that point in towards each other. And there is the exit button underneath that, so do try to avoid clicking that, otherwise you will exit the session. Save that for the end when we get to that point. Okay, so that's the housekeeping sorted. So let's have a look at what we're going to be covering in today's session. So firstly, I'll be taking you through installing your year-end update. Now, I'm aware that some of you may have already installed that as it is a mandatory update right now. However, some of these steps are really useful to have when it comes to future updates. And of course, some of the steps you can do after the install as well. But we'll explain that in a little bit more detail when we get into that section. Duncan will then be returning for taking you through preparing for year-end. So we'll be taking you through all of the steps and the checklist to finish your 22-23 payroll and get ready for that year-end process. Now the session itself is scheduled for an hour, but the presentation should only take between 30 to 45 minutes. So we do have a little bit of time at the end to cover any further support options that we have available for you, and of course to answer any remaining questions. So we will have some time at the end to try and ensure we get as many questions answered as possible. Okay, so with that being said, let's get into it and get things started with installing your year-end update. So as I mentioned, I'm aware that some of you may have already installed the update, but don't worry, these are still useful tips to have because updates happen every year and of course throughout the year as well. So good to keep note of. Now, the update was released on the 1st of March and it did go mandatory at the beginning of this week, which means you will need to install the update in order to access your program. There is a little bit of a checklist to run through to prepare for installing. Again, just a quick one on this. It is optional, all of these. So if you've done the update and you haven't done any of these steps, don't worry. The update's gone through fine and you're all right to go and log into your payroll as you'll be logging in and the update will have been finished. But these are some recommended steps you'd run before you do any installation. Now, the first is to optimize your data. Now, what this does is it just tidies up the data set a little bit, makes it nice and neat, reduces the size, and it just allows for a smoother installation. And it also allows for smoother processing as well. So if you imagine a drawer full of wires, that's your data. It just untangles them and has them nice, neatly lined up for you. So each wire still works. They're just quicker and easier to find. That's the best way I can describe what optimize the data does without getting into all of the technical jargon that may confuse quite a lot of people, including myself sometimes. So that's a process you can do prior to installing, but you can also do that process after you've installed the update. And it's one that we recommend you run fairly regularly. There is no time where you can do too many optimizers. You can do it as many times as you like. So it is worth knowing this procedure. So we'll have a look through that and demo it once we get through the checklist. The next is to check your program directory. Now, there's nothing to actually do with this. It's just to note down where your program is installed, because when you run through an installation or an upgrade, it will ask you if it wants to upgrade a specific install. So it knows you've already got Payroll installed on your computer. It's just asking if it's the right one and do you want to upgrade this one. So checking that program directory makes it easier to understand where your program's actually installed. Again, I'll show you where to go to check that. Next is to check for automatic updates and ensure these are switched on. Again, another good one you can do after you've installed for anyone who's already installed. And to do this, it just allows the program to recognize whether an update is available or not, and it will prompt you to download and install that. Now, there are a few things that can stop that happening, which are external to the program, such as firewalls and, of course, antivirus software, as well as you will need an internet connection for that to occur. So if any of that is having a problem, you can, of course, still download the update manually via a help center. So you can do it either way. And lastly, but most importantly, back up your payroll data. So you should back up your data whenever you're doing anything in the program, and that includes installations. It just makes sure you have that nice safety net. Should anything go wrong, it just makes you know that you'll always have your data there so you can get back to where you started if you need to. Now, a bit of advice when it comes to backing up data from me, and that's to store any backups on either an external hard drive or within a cloud-based storage system. This ensures that you can access those backups if you can't access your computer. So if you need to go and log into another PC or laptop, for example, because you can't get into your other one, you can still access those backups in order to get your payroll data back. There's nothing worse than when both backups and data are all on one computer and you can't actually open or turn on that computer for whatever reason. It means you can't access your data. So if you've got a backup on an external hard drive, you can access your data on any computer. Makes it nice and easy. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump off camera. We're going to bring up our Sage 50 Payroll program, and I'm going to show you how to do each of those individual steps. So as I mentioned, still very useful, even if you've already installed. Okay, so here we are in our Sage 50 Payroll. So the first one on the list was to optimize your data. Now, this is a process you will undertake when you log in to your 50 Payroll program for the very first time for the day. So we're already in a company, so I'm just going to go ahead and click Open Company, and you'll see the window that you tend to see when you first open the program. You can see we've got a number of companies there. Now, the first thing to note is when you're running the Optimize Your Data, what you'll need to do is do this individually for each company. So you can't do it for multiple companies at once. You have to do it one by one. So if we select one of our companies and click Optimize, you'll see we get a nice message pop up there that's saying, please wait while it optimizes your data. As you can see, before I was able to even finish that sentence, the optimize has been completed. So you click OK. So the process is extremely short, very quick, and a good one to do before you log in for the day. As I mentioned, you do need to do that company by company as you go through. So because it's nice and quick, it doesn't take too long if you've got a number of companies as well. So that's the optimize your data. Next is to go ahead and check your program directory. So I click help and then about. We get the support homepage up here. And in the top left, you'll see program details right here. And down the list, you'll find our program directory. This section is also where you can check your version number, but we'll come on to that a little bit later in the presentation. But the program directory can be found here. So you can see that my program is installed in my C drive, in program files x86, and then in Sage Payroll. Remember, there's nothing you need to do with this. You don't need to change anything or make sure it matches what I have on screen. It's just literally where your program is installed. So note that down so that you know where it is, and you'll see why when we come through the installation process itself. This is a typical install as well, so a lot of you may already have the same path on there, but just be aware that if it's different, don't worry, everyone's circumstances are different, so it can be a different place. Okay, so the next thing was to check automatic updates are switched on. So to do this, click Tools at the very top and then go to Internet Options. And in the first tab on the new window that appears, you'll see we have a few checkboxes. So the first three are all about the automatic updates. So you've got the option to check for updates automatically, but ask if you want to download and install them. The middle option downloads them automatically, but asks if you want to install them. And the third one both downloads and installs automatically the next time that you close the program. So this just ensures that the program is constantly checking for updates in the background, connecting with Sage servers to see if there's any updates available. Once you've done that, click OK. And lastly, but again, most importantly, backing up your payroll data. So this is a process I'm hoping you're all very familiar with. But to do this manually, if you click on File at the very top, then go to Backup, we bring up the backup wizard. Click Next. You'll see the files that we recommend you back up are highlighted automatically. You can, of course, choose these should you wish to. Click Next. This is where you would browse to the location you want your backup to be saved. So as I mentioned, it's always good to have it on an external hard drive, for example. Once you've then browsed to that location and given the backup a name, you can click Next. We'll just overwrite the one we did from yesterday's session. Click Yes, and then click Finish. And that is your backup complete. So now you have that safety net of knowing you can always get a hold of your data should anything go wrong. So those are the preparation steps. So we'll return back to the presentation itself and we'll bring myself back as well. And as I mentioned, if you have already installed and you didn't do any of these steps, don't worry, they're only a recommended step. Okay, so nothing is going to go wrong if you don't do them. All right, but it is something we recommend, and of course each process you can do throughout your payroll journey as well. So optimizing your data regularly, checking for automatic updates are switched on, and of course backing up your data you should be doing regularly anyway. So the next step is downloading and installing your update. So as I mentioned, the update is now mandatory, so you should be receiving that prompt on the right hand side the next time you open your program. Alternatively, you can download this manually from our help center. And if you're downloading the handout, you can find a link to that in the session notes. Okay, we'll move on because we'll be going through the installation of the update now. So there's two windows to call out here. The first one, you'll be clicking Accept License to move on. And here on the right hand side is where you're going to note your program directory. So this is the reason we ask you to note that down. So as you can see, the message just says it's detected the following installation of Sage Payroll. Is this the installation you wish to upgrade? And of course, if that path matches what the program directory shows, where I just showed you in the program, then you would click Yes. If not, click No and then browse to that location that you've noted down. Okay, so that's just a check. 9 times out of 10, it usually recognizes that you only have a single installation and it knows exactly where it's installed. So it's just asking if I want to upgrade this particular one. So I can see there from that particular screenshot that the program directory is exactly what we saw in the program. So I'm going to click Yes to that and the installation will begin. Okay, a quick note about after installing. So once you've finished the installation, the program will ask you to update your data or upgrade your data. Once it's done this, it just means you can then freely log in. So what it's doing is making the data itself also on version 29 after you've installed the update itself. Then you can go into those program details, I mentioned this earlier, and check your version number to see if it starts with version 29. So again, that's in help and about, and under program details is where you'll be checking your version number. Now a quick note on this one, and this can be relevant for those who have already finished their installation. The icon has changed. So you can see at the top of this slide, we've got a bit of an example of what it was and what it's changing to. So we're going from the older icon into this new black icon, and the name is also changing from Sage 50 Cloud Payroll to Sage 50 Payroll. Now, because the name is changing, you will also find that once you finish the install, you will have two icons on your desktop. Don't worry, nothing's went wrong. This is completely correct, and you can in fact use both icons to open your payroll. They link to the exact same location. So remember, icons on your desktop are just shortcuts, so it is completely visual, and it links to that same program file. So if you double click on either, you're going to open the program. You can of course delete one, which is the Sage 50 Cloud Payroll one, and have the new Sage 50 Payroll icon on your desktop. Quick note on that as well, the icon may not change immediately. It may require a restart of your computer, but don't worry, you don't need to do that straight away. You can do if you wish, of course, because you can still double click on that icon, even if it's still showing the old image. But when you next restart your PC, it will update. So don't be alarmed if it changes immediately, or if it doesn't change at all, it will eventually. And of course, don't be alarmed if you've got two icons on there. The installation has gone through absolutely fine. Before I bring Duncan back, I do want to just quickly touch on network installations. So this is a scenario where you may have a number of your colleagues who work on the same set of payroll data, which is stored on a server. So that icon on the right gives a bit of a visual representation. So the center circle is where your data is held, and each outer circles are each of your colleagues that all have their own version of payroll installed on their own laptop or computers. Now what will happen is, once one person installs the update and then tries to log in to the data, as you saw earlier, it will then upgrade that data to version 29. That means anyone who has yet to install the update tries to log in, they'll get that error message you see on screen. Now, error messages can be a little bit startling at times, but don't worry, if you do encounter this particular one, all it means is you need to go ahead and install the update. And once you've done that, you'll be able to log into the data, no problems at all. So for network installations, it's always good to try and coordinate the install and get everyone installed on the right version at the same time if you can. So that's installing your update. It is now time to bring Duncan back, because he's going to now take you through preparing for year end. So it's over to you, Duncan.
Thank you very much, Calvin. So the second half of this webinar is all around preparing for payroll year end, and this mostly involves completing your final pay run of the current tax year. But I do have a 5-point checklist that I'm going to run you through. We're going to include some demos for this as well. So let's start by taking a look at the checklist and the points that we're going to cross off. So step 1 there is to check if you have a week 53. Step 2 will be to process and update your final pay period for 2022 to 23. Step 3 is to process leavers if they've received their final pay and they're leaving in the current tax year. Step 4 is to submit your FPS for your last pay date, and if required, your EPS for month 12. And step 5 is to make sure you have a safe and secure backup of your payroll data. So we're going to start with week 53. And the first thing I'll say is this would only ever affect you if you run a weekly, fortnightly, or 4-weekly payroll. If you pay your staff monthly, you will always have 12 pay dates in the year, as there are 12 monthly periods. But if you do pay weekly, fortnightly, or 4-weekly, the number of days in a year doesn't divide into an exact number of weeks. And for that reason, there is a scenario that comes about every few years where you may have an extra pay date. Now, the thing that determines the tax period and whether you have a week 53 is the date your employees are paid. And this is the date you should be using when you set your process date. And for 2022 to 23, if your regular pay date will fall on Wednesday, the 5th of April, 2023, this is when you will have a week 53. So if you pay weekly, that would be your 53rd payment of the tax year, and that's where the name week 53 comes from. Now, if you pay your staff on any other day of the week, you will not have a week 53 this year, but you might have one in future years. Really depends on when your pay date is. And for those of you that do have a week 53, there's nothing that you need to do differently when you process the pay. So you would simply set the process date as usual, so 5th of April for week 53. You would then enter the payments in the usual way, and your payroll software will automatically apply the week 1 calculation to the PAYE tax for the relevant employees. So no need to change tax codes, no need to do anything differently, but it's something to be aware of if you have a week 53. And you might notice when you produce the P60s, there'll be an indicator on there to show that a week 53 has been processed. So that covers off step 1. We're now going to move on to step 2, and I'm going to give you a demo for this one. So let me bring the slides down and make this full screen for you. And we're going to take a look at processing and updating our final period of the current tax year. Now, in my demonstration, I'm running a monthly payroll, and the pay date for my employees is the last day of each calendar month. So my last pay date of the tax year will be the 31st of March 2023. Now, there's nothing different to do in the final period of the year, but if you employ directors and you've put them on the pro rata basis method, there will be an automatic recalculation of their national insurance in this last period. And I'll explain why that occurs a little bit later in the demo. So in this demo, I do actually have one director, and you can check the director status if you open the employee record and click on the employment tab. And you can see that this director has been set up on the pro rata basis, and that used to be known as the table method. And this means that their national insurance throughout the year has been calculated in the same way as a non-director, in this case using the monthly thresholds, but it will be recalculated on the annual basis on the last pay date of the year. Now, the other status you can use for directors is the annual basis. And with that method, there isn't a recalculation because the NI is calculated on that cumulative basis throughout the year. So it's only the pro rata basis directors that will get a recalculation, and you'll see a message that pops up as we run through the pay run. So what I'll now do is I'll just set my process date, and you can see I've already set it to my employee's pay date. And then I'm going to go into the enter payment step. I'm going to skip the check for legislation updates. And because I have employees that have either left or are marked on hold, I'm just going to click yes to this message to deselect them. So it's brought up the payments for that first employee, and this was my director. And you'll see when I save the payments for the director, we get the confirmation message that they've been recalculated on a year-to-date basis. And this national insurance figure is actually different to what they would usually pay on their salary, and I'll explain why in a few moments. So we're just going to continue with the pay run, saving the payments for the current period. And I would just like to point out that I do have one employee this month who is on parental leave, and they're receiving statutory paternity pay. And because I'm reclaiming that payment, I will be doing an EPS as one of the later tasks. So if I just continue through, saving the payments for the rest of my employees, I can then continue with my pay run in the usual way. So you'd run a pension assessment if you use our pensions module. You would run your pre-update reports and pay slips. And I'm just going to skip ahead to the update record step. And when I run through update records, I can click yes to continue. I can take my usual pre-update backup. So really important that you're regularly backing up your data. And once you've done that, you would run through and complete the update records wizard. So we can see that my employees have now been updated. And if you wanted to check the date they were updated, just have a scan down the last updated column. And this then confirms to me that for all these selected employees, they have now been updated for my last pay date of the tax year, which was the 31st of March. Now, I'm just going to come back to directors for a moment. So if I bring the slides back up, to explain the difference with directors, the way that their national insurance is calculated is based on their cumulative earnings and the annual directors' NI thresholds. And depending on the status you've set them up on, that either happens throughout the year if they're on the annual basis, or if, like me, you've put them on the pro rata basis, that's when you get your recalculation. And that's why that message popped up. Now, I'm sure you're aware there have been a number of national insurance changes throughout the current tax year. So back in July, the primary threshold was increased. And then in November, the rates for national insurance were decreased when the health and social care levy was cancelled. And because of these changes happening throughout the year, the way that the director's NI calculation is done is based on annualized thresholds and rates. So this is kind of the average thresholds and rates based on the changes that have occurred throughout the year. Now, you don't need to worry about these numbers because the calculation will be done automatically based on the most up-to-date legislation. But the primary threshold for directors for this tax year is £11,908. The employees' percentage for their main contribution above the primary threshold is 12.73%, and the employer contribution on earnings above the secondary threshold is 14.53. And those are the values that come out over the full year when you annualize the different changes that have occurred. So you can read more about how directors' national insurance works by following the link on the slide. But I wanted to quickly show you the effect that it had on the director we saw in the demo when the recalculation was done. So we have here a report, the payment summary history report for that particular director. And you can see each month they are earning the same salary, £2,500. But there was 1 month during the year where their pay increased because they received a bonus. And in month 9, they actually earned £10,000. Now, at the time when the national insurance was calculated, it would have used the monthly thresholds, and some of that pay would have fallen above the upper earnings limit. So when the employee national insurance was calculated, some of that would have been paid at 2% at the time. Now, come the end of the year, the annual earnings in this case are £37,500, and that is less than the annual upper earnings limit. And that's the reason why there's been a recalculation. And actually in month 12, where they were just paid their usual salary, they actually paid a lot more national insurance than they usually do, looking at previous months. And that's because they're effectively paying the national insurance that was due on that bonus payment they received back in December. So over the course of the year, they'd have paid the same national insurance if they were on annual basis as they have done on pro rata basis. But with pro rata basis, it allows your employees to spread the cost of the national insurance, and it is suited more to directors that receive around the same pay each period. Because as you've seen, if there's been variances in the pay, there can be a bit of a surprise at the end of the year when it comes to the recalculation. Employer NI has also been recalculated, but it's not so noticeable as the employer rate doesn't reduce above the upper earnings limit. And as I say, this is the same national insurance that would have been paid if they'd been on the annual basis all year. They've just paid it at slightly different times. So that's step 2 complete. We've processed our final pay date of the year and we've updated records. Let's just rejoin the demo as we move on to step 3. And we're now going to deal with any of our leavers. So when anyone leaves during the tax year, you should run the leaver wizard once you've processed their final pay. That will record their leaving date and allows you to produce a P45. And then the leaving details are submitted in the next FPS. And you can see earlier in the tax year, we did have a leaver. They were paid for the last time in December. Their current status is set to leaver. And that confirms that I have already ran the leaver wizard and I've submitted their leaving details, so there's no further action required for that particular employee. But what we should do now is check to see if anyone has left in the last period of the year. And it's also a good time to review your payroll to see if there's anyone that perhaps should have been made a leaver earlier in the year, but you haven't quite got round to doing that. Now, in my example, I do have one employee who left in March and they received their final pay in March. So you do need to have processed and updated their final payment before you do this. So I'm going to run the lever wizard here for employee 4, just by going to the employee tasks and then selecting lever. So we'll run through the lever wizard, recording the employee's leaving date. We can then produce the P45, which we can either print directly or we can preview first if we want to save our own copy, perhaps as a PDF. And once you're happy with the details, if you click Finish, that completes the lever wizard. You can see the current status is now set to lever, and it means that when we do our FPS for this last pay date of the year, the leaving details will then be included. Now, we'll just point out that I do have an employee who is marked on hold, and this is because they're a seasonal worker. They only work at peak times for me, so I still employ them, but they are not currently being paid. Now, because they haven't left, I don't need to make them a leaver, and because they're not currently working for me, I don't need to take them off hold, and I don't need to process any payment. So if you have employees on hold, keep them on hold. They'll still get a P60 as part of the year-end process, and you can then take them off hold the next time they need to be paid. Now, something you will notice as you move into the new tax year for employees on hold is you'll be prompted again to include them in the next FPS. And you should include them to say that they are irregularly paid. So make sure you've ticked the box to include them in the FPS, and then HMRC will be informed that they are still employed in the new year. It's just they're not currently working, and it submits the irregular payment indicator. So that's our levers dealt with, and we can now move on to step 4, which is to submit our FPS and EPS. So we'll just bring the presentation up for a moment on this one, as we do get a few queries around this last FPS of the year. And something just to understand is that the FPS that you submit for your last pay date of the year is not your final submission of the tax year. Now, other payroll software allows you to flag FPSs as a final submission, some other payroll software, but Sage Payroll software does a separate year-end submission as part of the year-end process. So if you've read any of the guidance from HMRC, they talk about sending your final report either as an FPS or an EPS. And the way that Sage works is you'll be sending a final EPS submission as a separate step in the year-end process. And you'll see that if you join us for part 2, preparing for year-end. So we're going to run through the FPS in the demo. You'll see that it's not flagged as the final submission, and that is fine. And we're also going to do an EPS for month 12, because we've actually reclaimed some statutory payment within this tax month. So let me bring the slides down again and continue with the demo. And we'll just make that full screen for you. I'm going to return to my payroll tasks, and I'll select my employees. And I'm now going to run the full payment submission step from here in the payroll tasks. Now you can ignore the warning. This only comes up because I'm in a training room, so I'm not doing a live submission. So you won't see that, but you will see the usual full payment submission screen. You can then check your gateway registration and company details. And then it will show you the information included in your submission. So as you can see, we've got the leave date for the employee that's been paid for the last time. We've got the tax period, month 12, and all of the liability figures. But in this section, final submission for year, this is still flagged as no, because of course we are going to do a separate final submission when we complete the year end. So all we need to do at this point is to click submit. The progress bar will move across the screen, and when it's finished, the submission of your data will be successful. And if you wanted to do a quick check, you can look down the employee list into the last FPS date column. You can see that that now matches our last updated column, and it's reading our last pay date of the tax year for all our current employees, the 31st of March. Now, the other step for me, because I've reclaimed a statutory payment, will be to submit the regular EPS. So not the final one, just a normal EPS. And I would do this by going to the e-submission tasks clicking on Employer Payment Summary, choosing the reason I'm sending an EPS. So in this case, I'm recovering statutory pay, and then I can work through the usual EPS wizard. Now, it will always submit year-to-date values. So as well as the statutory paternity pay that I'm reclaiming this month, previously in the tax year, I have also reclaimed statutory maternity pay, which is why you're seeing the figures here as well. I don't have any CIS deductions suffered to report, and I'm not paying any apprenticeship levy. So I'm just going to continue with that wizard, and I'll just remove the warning for you. And that takes us into the EPS submission. And again, it isn't the final one for the year. This is just because we're reclaiming the statutory payment. I can go ahead and submit that in the usual way. So that was step 4 complete. And our 5th and final step is to ensure that we have a safe and secure backup of our payroll data. And you saw Calvin demo this earlier, but as a reminder, to get to the backup wizard, simply go to the File menu at the top of the screen and then come down to Backup. You can then work your way through, backing up the suggested files, and use this Browse option if you want to choose the location or to rename the file so that you're not overwriting any previous backups. So really important to take a backup, and you'll find the Backup wizard there from the File menu. So that's about it for our checklist. Let's just bring it back up on screen and give you a quick recap of those steps. So step 1 was to check if you have a week 53. So that's weekly, fortnightly, or 4-weekly, with your pay date falling on Wednesday, the 5th of April. Step 2 was to process and update the final pay period of the year. And if you have directors on pro rata method, that's when they'll be recalculated. Step 3 was to process leavers if you've processed their final payment and their leaving date is in the current tax year. Step 4, submit your FPS and, if required, EPS. And then that final step was back up your payroll data. So with that checklist complete, you're ready to start thinking about year end. But there is one more thing to plan ahead for, and this is in relation to P60s. So have a think now how you might produce your P60s, and you might follow the same route that you do your pay slips. But to make you aware, there are 3 options for P60s in Sage 50 Payroll, and those are to either upload online P60s to the Sage HR online services portal, or if you're an accountant, to your online bureau portal. The second option is to email P60s, either from Outlook or if you've entered webmail settings via your webmail. And if you've set up to email payslips, you'll also be set up to email P60s in the same way. And the third option, if you want to go traditional, is to print the P60s. And these days, you don't even need stationery to do that. So you can't get stationery from Sage or HMRC for P60s. You can instead print them directly onto plain paper. So all of the boxes and background will be included when you do that. So it's something to think about as you approach year end. How are you going to do your P60s? And you can find more information on actually producing them if you attend part 2 on processing payroll year end. So that is it from me. I'm now going to bring back Calvin, and Calvin's going to take us through some of the further support available. So back over to you, Calvin.
Thank you so much, Duncan. So let's just get my screen shared there. Yes, so let's have a look at some of the further support that you have available to you throughout payroll year end, and of course throughout the time you were with Sage. So the first one is all about the webinars. So we do have part 2 webinar available as well, which is all about processing your year end and of course getting ready for the new tax year. So if you'd like to join us for part 2 and you're downloading a copy of the handout, you can register by clicking on the link in this section of the handout itself. We also have a one-off webinar happening on the 13th of March at 1 o'clock, which is with a panel of payroll experts where they're going to be sharing their knowledge on payroll, and they're going to be providing advice on getting it right the first time, avoiding mistakes, and of course planning on the new tax year as well. So it's a little less product heavy. Whereas we go through the product a lot, these guys are going to be giving you advice from their experience and of course on their knowledge of payroll as well. Next, we have our help center. So here is where you can access all of the help available to you. So you can search through our knowledge base. So you can type your question in that search bar there at the top and hit enter, or the question magnifying glass icon, sorry, and then that will bring up all the relevant guides to your query. You also have various support guides on different topics. So pensions, for example, payroll year end is one of those as well at this time of year. Processing payroll, correcting mistakes as well, which is often a good one to have a look at. You can access our webinars through the Help Center as well. Now, we do run weekly webinars. At this moment in time, though, as I'm sure you'd imagine, it is all about payroll year end. But once that comes to a close, then we will be we'll be resuming our weekly webinars on a Thursday, and we're going to be introducing a Wednesday as well, and that will be on a variety of different topics, all to do with Sage 50 payroll. So be sure to have a look at those and keep an eye on that webinars tab at the very top as we update that quite regularly. But just bear in mind, it is currently all about payroll year end, so just keep an eye on that one. We do as well have videos within our help center as well. And of course, if you do need to speak to any of our support guys, you can do so by getting in touch through the help center as well. And lastly, but quite importantly, and possibly my favorite one, is Sage University. Now head on over to sageu.com, and here you can access free e-learning, Sage certification as well, so product certifications, as well as bite-sized learning. And of course, it is free to access as a Sage customer. So head on over to Sage U, and you can expand your Sage payroll learning just a bit more. And the best part is these can be done in your own time and at your own pace. And the certification comes with nice badges and nice little certificates that you can share on social media if you wish to as well. Okay, so that wraps up the session for today. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend the rest of the time just answering any remaining questions that you guys may have. So do keep them coming, and we'll close it once all the questions have been answered and we're not getting any few through. So we may be closing it early. It all depends on whether we get the questions answered or not. So if you have any questions, please do let us know in the right-hand side there. If you are leaving us at this point in time, it's been an absolute pleasure to see so many of you on the session today. It's nice to have a busy session. I hope you've enjoyed it and got something out of it as well. I really do mean it. We really do hope that. You will be presented with a short feedback survey as well when you click that exit button or the session closes, and it does mean quite a lot to both myself and Duncan if you can fill that in for us. It really helps us improve these sessions, and we really do value that feedback that you guys give us. And I know you probably hear that line quite a lot if ever you call support for any company really, but we really do value it. As an example, the webcams that we've had on today have been off the back of the feedback that we've had of you guys. You've loved it, so we've kept them and turned them on. So I'm going to jump off now, help the guys out, answer some questions. So there will be no sound for this particular part, but the next time I'm back will be to wrap things up and say our final goodbyes. Thanks again. Okay, so I can see that we haven't had a question in for a while now, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up the session here. Thank you again to everyone who has attended so far, and to those who've stuck around to the end. It's been an absolute pleasure to see everyone in the sessions today. Don't forget about part 2 this afternoon. If you haven't already registered, now's your last chance to click on those links or download the handout to get a hold of the link. But you can always find them in our help center as well. So if we close the session and you haven't had a chance, go on, head on over to sage.co.uk/PYE and you'll be able to register for part 2. That's all from me now. I just want to say a big thank you again. I hope you're all looking after yourselves out there and staying safe, and of course a little bit warm in this colder climate that we're having at the moment. And of course, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.